In this lesson, we're going to be talking about flammables and combustible liquids. This lesson is presented by the OSHA Office of Training Education for use for those of us who teach OSHA and worker safety related issues. There's two primary hazards associated with flammable and combustible liquids. You have explosion and fire. Safe handling of and storage of flammable liquids requires the use of approved equipment and practices per OSHA standards. Now, there's some terminology we're going to talk about first. We're going to start off with flash point. Flash point means the minimum temperature at which a liquid gives off enough vapor to form an ignitable mixture. In general, the lower the flash point, the greater the hazard. Flammable liquids have flash points below 100 degrees Fahrenheit and are more dangerous than combustible liquids because they may be ignited at room temperatures. Combustible liquids have flash points at or above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Although combustible liquids have higher flash points than flammable liquids, they can pose serious fire and or explosion hazards when heated. So if we take a look at the boiling point versus the flash point, okay, we will see that we have different classes of flammables and combustible liquids. Okay, a class 1 A, B, or C has a flash point below 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Class 2 or 3A has a flash point greater than or equal to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, there's a difference between class 1A and 1B. The boiling point falls into play here as well. We could have a boiling point at 100 degrees, so if it's greater than 100 degrees boiling point, it's a class 1B. If it's lower than 100 degrees boiling point, it's a class 1A. So here's some common classes of flammable liquids. Class 1A would be like ethyl ether, has a flash point of negative 49 degrees Fahrenheit, very flammable. Gasoline, flash point of negative 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, turpentine is a class 1C, 95 degree Fahrenheit. So what do we look for in a plan or a program to take care of combustibles? A good plan for safe use of flammable and combustible liquids contain at least three components, or these components: control of ignition sources, proper storage, fire control, and safe handling. So we must take adequate precautions to prevent ignition of flammable vapors. Some sources of ignition can include open flames, smoking, static electricity, cutting and welding, hot surfaces, electrical and mechanical sparks, or lightning. Static electricity is also a source of ignition. It's generated when fluid flows through a pipe or from an opening into a tank. Main hazards of static electricity are fire and explosion from sparks containing enough energy to ignite the vapors. Bonding or grounding of flammable liquid containers is necessary to prevent static electricity from causing a shock. Bonding is physically connecting two conductive objects together with a bond wire to eliminate a difference in static charge potential between them. Okay, if we connect two different things, like the nozzle from a gas tank to the tank in the car with a wire, it will actually prevent a static electricity because there's no difference in potential. We must provide a bond wire between containers during flammable liquid filling, unless a metallic path between them is present. So at the gas station, we don't necessarily put a bond wire between our tank and the nozzle of the gas dispenser. However, the metallic dispenser nozzle is in contact with the car tank fill thing, so there is an electronic path there. Grounding eliminates the difference in static charge potential between conductive objects and the ground. Although bonding will eliminate the difference in potential between objects, it will not eliminate a difference in potential between these objects and Earth unless one of the objects is connected to the Earth through the ground wire. Ventilation is extremely important with flammable liquids. We always want to provide adequate ventilation to reduce the potential for ignition of flammable vapors. So we have some storage fundamentals that we need to talk about as well. Okay, we need to identify incompatible chemicals. We want to check the material safety data sheets or the new safety data sheets. We want to isolate and separate incompatible materials. Isolate them by storing in another area or room. Okay, and the degree of isolation needs to depend on the quantities, chemical properties, and packaging. Separate them by storing them in the same area or room but apart from each other. They can be in different flammable material cabinets sometimes. Storage must not limit the use of exits, stairways, or areas normally used for safe egress of people. In other words, you cannot have enough flammable materials there in a storage room where you can't get out. In office occupancy, storage is prohibited except which is required for maintenance and operation of equipment. In an office environment, or sometimes schools, storage must be in closed metal containers inside a storage cabinet or safety cans or inside a storage room, specifically designated for the purpose. Safety cans for storage and transfer, they have to be approved containers of not more than 5-gallon capacity. They have to have a spring-closed lid and spout cover. They need to safely relieve internal pressure when exposed to fire. In other words, we don't want the tank to blow up, so there has to be a pressure relief. There should be a flame arrestor screen. This prevents fire flashback into the can contents. It's a double wire mesh construction, and it has a large surface area, provides rapid dissipation of heat from fire so that the vapor temperatures inside the can remains below the ignition point. Storage cabinets are regulated as well. There should not be more than 60 gallons of Class 1 or Class 2 liquids and not more than 120 gallons of Class 3 liquids permitted in a cabinet. They must be conspicuously labeled, flammable, keep fire away. The doors on the metal cabinet must have 3-point lock, top, side, and bottom, and the door still must be raised at least 2 inches off the bottom of the cabinet. Fire control devices must be present. Okay, suitable fire control devices such as small hose, portable fire extinguishers must be available for where flammable or combustible liquids are stored. Open flames and smoking must not be permitted in these storage areas. Materials which react to water must not be stored in the same room with flammable or combustible liquids. Since there's a sizable risk whenever flammable liquids are handled, OSHA allows only 4 methods of transferring these materials. You can only transfer them through a closed piping system, from safety cans, by gravity through an approved self-closing safety faucet, and by means of a safety pump. The self-closing safety faucet includes a bonding wire between the drum and the container, the grounding wire between the drum and ground, and a safety vent in the drum. A safety pump is faster and safer than using a faucet, makes spills less likely. There's no separate safety vents in the drum required, and it can be installed directly in the drum opening. Some pump hoses have integral bonding wires, so you don't have to use an extra wire. When you have waste and residue of flammable and combustible liquids, you have to treat them separately. Combustible waste and residue must be kept to a minimum. It has to be stored in a covered metal receptacle and disposed of daily. So here's 3 examples. You have a waste drum with a disposal funnel. You have a safety disposal can, notice the spring closing cover. Or you have an oil waste can with a self-closing lid. So safe handling fundamentals include: you need to carefully read the manufacturer's label on a flammable liquid container before storing or using it. Practice good housekeeping in flammable liquid storage areas. Clean up spills immediately and then place the cleanup rags in a covered metal container. Only use approved metal safety containers or original manufacturer containers for flammable liquids. Keep the containers closed when not in use and store away from exits or passageways. Use flammable liquids only where there is plenty of ventilation. Keep flammable liquids away from ignition sources such as open flames, sparks, smoking and cutting, and welding. So here's a summary of what we've talked about. We have two primary hazards associated with flammable and combustible liquids: explosion and fire. We need to practice safe handling and storage of flammable liquids, require the use of approved equipment and practices per OSHA standards. A good reference of this is the National Fire Protection Association Standard Number 30, Flammable and Combustible Liquid Code.